I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing Good Omens, written by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. This book was published in 1990, and I listened to the audiobook narrated by Martin Jarvis. This book was absolutely hilarious, and I had so much fun reading it. I've been wanting to read it for a while just because I love both Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. They're such brilliant fantasy writers, and just seeing them work together was so incredible. I could definitely feel both of their influences in this book. You know, Terry Pratchett is great at just ridiculous, hilarious fantasy situations, and his style is so joyously ridiculous. It was so clear in this book, and he also had some of his signature elements in there, like God creating the earth, but putting in dinosaur bones just to mess with people, or that death is someone personified, even if it's not the same death that we have in Discworld, which is what Terry Pratchett is most famous for writing. And then Neil Gaiman is so good at doing really dark, macabre things that also have this kind of graceful elegance to them, and so just seeing those two writing styles together made for such an amazing book. So this book is about the end of times, as seen mostly from the perspective of the demon Crowley and the angel Aziraphale. The scale of this book was great, because it's this big apocalyptic story about the end of times and the fate of the universe being decided, but it's also so incredibly English, and all the characters are so very British, and it's so great to watch them running around the English countryside and having tea and doing all these very British things, and it was just amazing. So if you want to read a hilarious book about the end of times with all kinds of ridiculous jokes about just the nature of humanity and all kinds of like biblical jokes and all sorts of stuff thrown in, then definitely go read this book, then come back to hear my opinions. So I think my favorite part of this book was watching Crowley and Aziraphale interact, because they just had such amazing chemistry. They were incredibly different, and it talked about them being like spies in the field. They've been out there a long time and they're definitely working against each other, but they're immortal and they've known each other for thousands of years, and over those years they've formed this wonderful little friendship, and it's so great to watch them hang out and chat about the fate of the universe together. And then Crowley has such great pizzazz, and he loves his car so much, and it's so much fun to just watch him drive around in his car, which is almost like another character. There's the whole running gag about how every cassette tape left in a car for a certain period of time will turn into a Best of Queen album, which is even more hilarious because Bohemian Rhapsody just came out, so I actually recognized some Queen songs when they were referenced in the book, and it was so hilarious that they try to put on classical this or this great opera or whatever, and it would always be just more of Queen's greatest hits, and that was so hilarious to me. I also loved Aziraphale with his, rare bookshop, and he knows all about rare books. So when he finds the Book of Prophecies, then he is like, you think, okay, he really knows what to do with this, and like, even though he does have the skills to recognize it right away, he just sits there and reads it while his cup of cocoa gets old and starts to evaporate and grow mold or whatever, and it's great, because like, all this stuff is happening in the book, and we just cut back to Aziraphale, who's still sitting there, and they describe the state of his hot cocoa now, as time has passed further, and it's just so awesome, and he's so useless, and it's so amazing. So the way the baby mix-up was described was just so ingenious. It was such a fun scene to watch. Everyone's trying to switch out the babies. We're going to switch out the Antichrist for this normal human baby. And then, everything goes wrong, and there's the secret winking between the nurses who totally understand each other and didn't miscommunicate at all. And the nurses are hilarious, by the way, because, well, I guess they're not nurses, they're nuns. They're the Order of the Chattering Nuns, which is amazing, because, we know of all these religious orders that are silent, and these are just a religious order that chatters, and that was so hilarious. And then I loved it that, that same nun comes back later, and when Crowley and Aziraphale are trying to track down what happened to Adam, it turns out that once she was done being a baby delivering nun or whatever, she went into being a business event planner, and now her job is to organize paintball games for companies and get paid so much money, and that was just so great. I also thought it was hilarious, this whole premise of the book is it is the great battle between heaven and hell. And so everyone would think that, the followers of Satan would be these terrifying, evil people. But it turns out some of them are really into it, and other ones just kind of go to church occasionally and don't really think about it too often. And that was just so hilarious that, the reason that the satanic worshippers don't get much done is, you know, that they're just kind of lazy and don't think about it all that often. It's more that, like, they know their parents believed in it strongly and they just can't be bothered to think too hard and change their minds. So Crowley and Aziraphale have spent all these years mentoring the ambassador's son, which is, you know, what the Antichrist was supposed to be swapped out with. And, you know, nothing happens and nothing happens. And it's hilarious to me that no one can figure out that this is the wrong baby until they release the Hellhound, and he goes and finds Adam. And Adam just names him Dog and takes him on adventures, and they have fun together. And Adam's childhood sounds like so much fun. It sounds like a movie from the 80s, you know, where you have all these kids, like 10-year-olds, just riding around on bikes, creating havoc. And I love that they have a gang of kids, you know, a gang of 10-year-olds, who try to come up with all these fancy names, but everyone just refers to the gang as them. So they are the them. And the rest of the book, it'll just be going along and they'll talk about the them did this, and that is the best name ever. And it's just great to watch these kids running around, playing, having fun, and Adam has all these supernatural powers. So, like, things are building and getting more dramatic, and you can see all the forces of evil converging, and it's just still a bunch of kids running around in fields playing and stuff, and that's hilarious. I loved the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It was so great the way we got to see them throughout the book, and they had such strong personalities. The way they would just switch careers was great. You know, Famine was in the fashion industry, and then he was in the diet meal industry. And War worked selling ammunition, and then she got tired of that, so she switched to being a war correspondent. They were such vivid characters who just ooze personality so much, and I love that they all had each person had their own color scheme. And so the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse meet up in a bar, and this group of bikers decides to follow them and become 4 more horsemen of the apocalypse. And they're just like, alright, the 4 horsemen are famine, war, pollution, and death. And so we're going to come up with our own cool names. And the bikers are riding along trying to act all cool, changing their names as they go, until they, like, drive into a wall of fire, and that's the end of them. But that's hilarious. And it's this great setup, because they're trying to be 4 more horsemen of the apocalypse. So that introduces the idea that the 4 horsemen might not really be the ones who are prophesized to do stuff. And it's perfect, because then it turns out that the them are really the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And at the big climactic scene, you know, Adam runs around and gets them, like, little bits of sticks to be their swords and stuff. And that's just so great. And it's like this great creative game that these kids were playing turned into this whole big universe-altering event. And, you know, Adam grows up a lot and figures out that, you know, he does have to take responsibility for stuff, but it still has this fun, whimsical quality to it. And then it's great that in the end, you know, he decides he doesn't really want to have the responsibility, and it doesn't help anyone, so he's just not going to use his powers, except for a few little things that are awesome. And I think my favorite scene in the whole book was right before all this happens with the climax. You have the middle-aged man who's out walking his wife's tiny dog, and you see all of these different people rushing past. The kids on bikes, the horsemen of the apocalypse, all this motley crew of totally random people go racing past, and it's like the scene in the Pink Panther or something, some of those great 60s movies where it's just so hilarious, and it's like, it feels like you're watching a movie. It's just so great to see everything go by, and this poor guy who's just out trying to walk his dog, seeing all this chaos flow past him, and I loved it. Newt was hilarious. I loved it that the only thing in the world he is good at is breaking electronics, and that ends up saving the world, because he tries to fix the thing and it shuts down, and like power across the world has just been shut down temporarily, and that saves everything, and that was perfect. I loved Shadwell and his whole Witchfinder army, and he thinks that his hand is the strongest force in the universe that vanquished something, when really he just waved his hand coincidentally when something else was going to happen, and he's like, I'll use my hand on you! And it's just so hilarious. I also love the way he interacted with Madame Tracy throughout the whole book, but then especially when she's possessed by Aziraphale, and there are like 3 people in 2 bodies going along on this little tiny scooter, and you have the big, scary witch hunter major, and you have Madame Tracy, who will spontaneously like start talking to herself in a different voice because it's Aziraphale, and then the little scooter is just like zooming along, and it's just so amazing. I love that so much. And we have this flying hilarious scooter trying to race there, and then we have Crowley's car again, which is just like falling apart, and he's still holding it together with like pure force of will, even though it's like gone through flames and it's melted and it's hovering above the ground because it has no tires anymore. We have all these ridiculous vehicles all converging. And then we have poor Anathema running around just trying to do what Agnes Nutter wanted her to do. And I loved everything about Agnes Nutter. She was amazing. Like, you barely see her. Like, she maybe gets like a brief second in the story, but because of her prophecies, you feel like she's there so much. She's this huge character, and she's just so awesome. And so throughout the whole story, even though Agnes isn't really in it at all, you can kind of picture her just sitting there watching everything happen and writing about it in her nice and accurate book of prophecies. And she's just so sassy and awesome. The way she's like, okay, I know that you're going to convict me of being a witch and burn me at the stake, so I'm going to get some explosives and blow up everyone who tries to burn me at the stake. And right beforehand, she yells at the sky, and you have no idea why. And it turns out it's because she knows that Shadwell is going to have a vision of the past, and she wants to yell at him, and that's just great. And then, you know, throughout the whole story, you're thinking, well, Agnes wrote her book of prophecies to end. That means the apocalypse has to happen. The world is going to end because her prophecies don't go any farther, and we've established that she's the only real prophet who ever lived. And you think it's going on, and the end has all happened. The climax has happened. Adam decides not to end the world, and Newt and Anathema are back at Anathema's cottage. And Newt gets a delivery, and it is Agnes Nutter's Nice and Accurate Book of Prophecies, Volume 2. And it's great, and I want to know so much if there's even anything written in it, because, you know, Anathema decides to just burn it up and not live her life based around the prophecies and get to kind of have more free will. So you wonder if Agnes even bothered writing anything down, or if she knew it would just get burnt up and no one would read it. I don't know, but it's great, and I love the way it was delivered. It was so much like the scene at the end of Back to the Future 2, where you're just like, my office has been holding on to this for the last several hundred years. We're supposed to bring it to you right now, and I can't imagine how they would know anyone would be here, but we've got to do it, and it was just so great, and I loved it so much. I had such a good time with this book. It was so funny and dark and hilarious and ridiculous, and made such great observations about human nature, and it was just a delight to read from beginning to end.